Welcome to the Dark Chronicle. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and the time of day it is for you. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to catch every chilling tale. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Caleb Rourke tightened the cinch on his saddle and cast a long, measuring glance across the Texas prairie. The land stretched outward in every direction like an ocean of dust and brush, shimmering under the rising heat, the kind that promised misery for anyone foolish enough to travel unprepared. But Caleb wasn't new to misery. He had lived most of his 38 years under its weight, and he wore it like a second skin. Beside him, Miles Dutton spat into the dirt and adjusted the rifle slung across his shoulder, while Silas Creedy, thin as a rail and always twitching with some inner itch, paced impatiently. They were three men accustomed to hunting people, to tracking the desperate through wilderness, storms, and blood-soaked mud. Their reputation preceded them across counties. If someone escaped, these three would find them, not always alive, but always found. And yet today, for reasons none of the men voiced aloud, the air felt different, unnervingly still. Even the winter birds perched along the distant fence posts seemed to watch them with unusual intent. "Tracks are fresh," Miles muttered, crouching down beside the faint impressions in the ground. The dirt was loose, but he was skilled at reading even the smallest clues. 6 of them, maybe 7, moving fast. Caleb didn't reply right away. He lowered himself to inspect the prints, brushing the earth with 2 fingers. He saw the hurried scuffs left by bare feet and the occasional deeper mark where someone had stumbled. These were no seasoned travelers. They were frightened, exhausted, and almost certainly hungry. Under normal circumstances, it would have been an easy catch, but nothing about this felt normal. He rose slowly, scanning the terrain. A thin fog clung low across the field like a ghost unwilling to rise. Beyond it, the brush thickened toward the east where the runaways had headed. A poor choice, no water for 20 miles, and the mesquite forests beyond were dense with thorns. Anyone running blindly into them risked more danger than safety, unless they weren't running blindly at all. "We ride now," Caleb said finally. "If we push hard, we catch 'em before sundown." Silas smirked, wiping sweat from his brow even though dawn's chill still lingered, "and earn ourselves a hefty reward. They say the owner wants 'em back quick, paid in advance for speed." Caleb didn't acknowledge the remark, though the truth of it weighed on him. The plantation owner who had hired them had been unusually desperate, his voice tight, his hands trembling around his pipe. He wanted his property returned, and he wanted it immediately. Caleb had sensed something strange, something unspoken, but he'd learned long ago that questions rarely led to answers worth hearing. He mounted his horse, and the others did the same. With a sharp kick, the trio began their pursuit. The prairie wind met them head-on. Dust coiled around the horses' hooves, and the sunlight spilled across the land in a molten wave. Their direction was clear. The footprints cut a clean line across the ground before fading into the brush. Caleb rode at the front, eyes fixed ahead, the familiar rhythm of the chase settling into him, but unease gnawed at his mind. He'd hunted enough people to know the sound of desperation in footprints. These held something more, something almost organized. The spacing of the steps was irregular but purposeful, not the chaotic scattering of terrified people running in panic. It was as if someone was guiding them, steering them along a route only they understood. "Think they had help?" Miles called out over the wind. "Looks like it," Caleb answered. Silas scoffed. "Who? Ain't no abolitionists out here, and the tribes keep to their own lately." Caleb could only shrug. He didn't trust assumptions. Texas was vast, wild, and filled with people whose motives didn't always align neatly with politics or property. There were pockets of resistance hidden deep in the landscape, rumors of free men, outcasts, and communities that sheltered those fleeing slavery. Most were whispers, stories told around firelit nights to frighten or inspire, depending on who listened. But sometimes whispers held truth. They pressed on. As the morning stretched toward noon, the terrain shifted from dry grassland into rocky soil peppered with thorny shrubs. The sun burned hotter, the horses' breaths grew heavy, and the uneasy silence of the prairie became almost oppressive. Caleb felt watched, not by animals, not by the usual coyotes or hawks, but by something human. At one point he pulled his horse to a stop. "Hold up." Miles and Silas halted beside him. "What is it?" Miles asked, wiping his forehead. Caleb didn't answer. He dismounted and approached a patch of overturned dirt beneath a twisted mesquite tree. Kneeling, he brushed aside loose soil to reveal a half-buried impression, too shallow to be a proper footprint. "Someone covered their tracks," he murmured. Miles frowned. Why would runaways waste time doubling back to hide prints? "They wouldn't," Caleb said. "Not unless someone told them how." Silas shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "This ain't right. They're supposed to be scared, running blind, not pulling tricks." Caleb stood, dusting his hands. A quiet breeze rustled the branches overhead, making the tree creak like an old hinge. He felt the hair on his arms rise. "This ain't tricks," he said. "It's strategy." For a long moment the three men stood in stillness, each processing what that meant. Then, in the distance, a crow cried sharply, a sound that echoed oddly across the empty field. Caleb mounted again. "We keep moving." By early afternoon the prairie gave way to terrain more rugged and cruel. Jagged limestone jutted out from the earth, forming natural ridges that cast long shadows across the ground. The runaways had passed through here. Caleb saw signs of torn cloth, broken branches, and disturbed soil where someone had stumbled. But there was also something else. Symbols carved into tree bark, simple lines intersecting at angles, a spiral, an arrow pointing west. Miles leaned in close. "You think they carved those?" "No," Caleb replied. "These were made days earlier, maybe weeks." "By who?" Caleb hesitated. "Someone who knew this land better than us." Silas circled a tree with narrowed eyes. Meaning we're riding into a place mapped by someone else." They rode onward, though the landscape seemed to swallow them deeper with every step. The wind changed direction, blowing warm, then colder, then warm again, as though the land itself were exhaling unevenly. Caleb tried to shake the feeling, but found it impossible. By late afternoon, the trail grew fresher again. The footprints reappeared, clearer this time, as though the runaways had become too tired to hide them. Sweat-soaked, stumbling, slowed. "They're close," Miles said, voice sharp. "Real close." Caleb nodded, though he didn't like how easy the trail suddenly became. It felt like a shift, like the runaways wanted to be found now, wanted them to follow, and they did. The brush parted abruptly into a wide clearing, and the sudden exposure made Caleb's skin crawl. Too open, too quiet. The sky overhead blazed orange as the sun angled downward, shadows stretching long across the ground. "We camp here?" Silas asked. Caleb frowned. "Not if I can help it." But daylight was fading fast, and the horses were exhausted. With no choice, the men set camp at the clearing's edge. Caleb gathered dry wood while Miles built the fire, and Silas took first watch. The sky dimmed to deep violet, and night crept in with a swiftness that startled them. The fire crackled, sending sparks swirling upward. Coyotes howled distantly, and the air cooled just enough to remind them how lonely the wilderness could be. Caleb sat sharpening a knife, though he didn't feel the need for the blade. The act helped him focus, drown out the things crawling around in his mind. "Something's wrong with this chase," Miles muttered across the fire. "Feels like they're leading us." Caleb didn't disagree. Silas, perched on a rock with his rifle, snorted. "You two jump at shadows too quick." A branch snapped in the dark. All three men stiffened. Caleb rose quietly, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. Shadows stretched between trees like reaching fingers. The night was silent now, too silent. Silas lifted the rifle. "Probably a deer." Caleb shook his head. "Deer make noise. They run or grunt. That was different." Miles swallowed hard. "You think it was them?" "No," Caleb murmured. "Not them." Something moved again, soft, careful footsteps, as though testing the edge of sound. Whoever or whatever was out there didn't flee when noticed. It lingered, watching. The horses began to shift uneasily, their ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Caleb stepped closer to the fire, but only so he could reach for his rifle. "Stay alert," he whispered. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched long and taut, and then nothing. No attack, no rush, no voice. Just the steady crackling of the fire and the faint tremor of the horses. Eventually the sound faded, and the night reclaimed its stillness. Miles exhaled shakily. Whatever it was, it's gone now. But Caleb knew better. Whatever lurked beyond the brush had not left. It had only retreated far enough to watch them more comfortably. He sat again, staring at the flames. A chilling understanding settled into him like sinking stone. The runaways were not lost. The runaways were not alone. And for the first time in his long, violent career, Caleb Rourke realized something deeply unsettling. This wasn't a hunt, it was an invitation. And they had already accepted it. The fire had long since burned low, its embers glowing faintly like dying stars as dawn seeped into the sky. Caleb Rourke had not slept. He had sat through the long night listening to the forest breathe around him, slow, deliberate, far too aware. The strange footsteps from the previous night replayed in his mind with a persistence he resented. Something was out there, something that wasn't a runaway or an animal or a wandering hunter, something that wasn't afraid of approaching 3 armed men under cover of darkness. Miles and Silas had dozed in and out. By sunrise all 3 looked worn, but no one dared admit fear. Slave hunters didn't fear the night. They were meant to be the ones feared. Yet as the pale morning light crept across the clearing, illuminating the trees with a cold, almost metallic shimmer, they packed their camp with a quiet tension that words could not hide. Caleb mounted first, scanning the line of trees bordering the clearing. He half expected to see shapes watching, shadows, faces, but the forest was as still as carved stone. Miles kicked dirt over the last of the embers. Silas checked his rifle twice before climbing onto his horse. "Tracks will be clear in morning light," Miles said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Let's just move," Silas muttered. They did. The trail picked up easily on the far end of the clearing. 7 sets of tracks, the same number Caleb had counted yesterday. Bare feet, quick steps, uneven pressure. But as they rode deeper into the mesquite woods, the prints changed again. Fewer stumbles, tighter grouping. Someone had steadied them, guided them. Caleb rode slowly at the front, eyes narrowed, senses sharp. The woods here were dense, filled with twisting branches and low shrubs that snagged against their boots and saddles. The air hung heavy, warm, carrying the faint smell of damp earth and something else. Smoke? Not fresh, but not old either. It confirmed what Caleb already suspected. Ed, the runaways had fire, shelter, a destination. These people weren't wandering aimlessly. They were being led. As the woods thickened, the sunlight dimmed. The mesquite branches formed arching tunnels overhead, letting in only fractured beams of light that danced on the ground. Caleb slowed his horse to a stop. "Look." Miles and Silas leaned in when Caleb pointed at a peculiar marking carved into the trunk of a leaning tree. A circle intersected by 3 straight lines, simple but deliberate.
"That the same symbol from yesterday?" Miles asked. "Close," Caleb murmured. "But this one's newer."
Silas snorted. "Some tribal nonsense, means nothing." "No," Caleb said quietly, "it means direction. It's a signpost." Miles looked around nervously. Sign for who? Caleb didn't answer, but deep in his gut a cold certainty had formed overnight. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone understood the land intimately, knew every fold of soil, every crooked tree, every shadowed bend, and someone wanted the hunters to walk right where they were walking, slowly. Predictably, Silas rode forward, brushing his hand across another tree, this one marked with 2 horizontal slashes cut into the bark. "Looks like a trail," he said, "but cut for what? Who the hell carves out guide marks in the middle of nowhere?" Miles glanced around again, lowering his voice. Maybe those runaways linked up with a free group, heard stories, folk hiding out in the woods helping slaves run. Could be a camp, could be more than just 6 or 7. Caleb kept his face unreadable. Stories of hidden villages, runaways forming small communities protected by people who rejected Texas's brutal laws. He'd heard them too. Everyone had. But seeing whispers turned into carved signs made the idea far too real. The hunters pressed onward, following the deepening trail. The woods grew stranger as the day stretched on. Twice they came across old fire pits filled with ash. Once they found a tattered length of cloth tied to a branch, fluttering like a warning flag. Twice more they saw symbols carved into trees, each pointing deeper into the labyrinth-like forest. "This is wrong," Miles muttered as they reached a narrow path squeezed tightly between towering brush walls. "Should have caught 'em by now," Caleb agreed. Every chase had a rhythm, a pattern. This one had none. This one felt controlled, measured. Their prey was tired, hungry, and running barefoot. And yet the hunters hadn't closed distance. If anything, the tracks seemed to slip farther ahead, as if the land itself were elongating beneath their horses. "Could be they split up," Silas offered half-heartedly. Caleb shook his head. "Tracks stay together." Silas grunted, uneasy. "Then they're just fast." "No," Caleb murmured. "They're not fast, they're prepared." A thick silence followed those words. Sometime near midday a faint echo drifted through the trees, so faint Caleb almost dismissed it. A low hum, like a voice, not a cry for help, not a shout. A tone, controlled, rhythmic. He raised a hand. "Stop." Silas stiffened. What is it now? Listen. They held their breaths. The hum carried again, drifting in on a wind that shouldn't have reached them through the trees. It faded, then returned, stronger this time. A voice, maybe two. They're close, Miles whispered. No, Caleb said. If they were close, they wouldn't make noise. For the first time, Silas lost color in his face. Then who the hell is making it? The hum vanished, evaporating into the forest as though it had never existed. But a new sound took its place, soft crunching of brush, footsteps, light, deliberate. Someone was walking parallel to them, unseen. Caleb's heart hammered once. He snapped his rifle upward. Show yourself. His voice cracked through the woods like a whip. Leaves shuddered. Branches rustled high in the canopy, but no one answered. No one fled. Miles raised his gun too, turning in slow circles. They're in trees, he whispered. Silas hissed. Quit talking nonsense. Then where are they? Miles snapped. Caleb scanned every shadow, every patch of light. He saw nothing, but he sensed something. The footsteps were not random. They were pacing the hunters, studying them, adjusting speed with uncanny accuracy. Move, Caleb commanded. Now. They rode hard, pushing their horses through the narrowing path. Branches scraped their coats and hats. Twigs snapped under hooves. The woods grew darker still, like dusk compressed into daylight. Caleb felt the eyes on him, felt the presence. It followed without pause, neither falling behind nor rushing ahead. Then, abruptly, the trees thinned. The hunters burst into a hollow bordered by massive oaks and tangled brush. A pool of muddy water sat in the center, shallow and stagnant. The footprints they followed vanished at its edge. Silas dismounted, knelt and scanned the ground. They went through here. Miles leaned over. But we'd hear 'em, or see 'em. Caleb walked to the water's edge. The mud was disturbed but faintly. Either the runaways had crossed hours ago, or someone had erased the newer prints. He knelt, dipped 2 fingers into the mud, and rubbed it between his thumb. Warm, too warm for morning sun alone. They were here recently, he murmured. Silas stepped back, fear finally eroding his bravado. How far could they get without us hearing 'em? Caleb stood. Farther than we think. A soft whistle drifted through the trees behind them, the same tone as before, but sharper now, clearer, intentional. Miles spun around. Behind us! No, Caleb said grimly. Around us! The whistle sounded again, this time from the left, then from the right, then from straight ahead. 3 different points, 3 different voices. Whoever was out there wasn't just following the hunters, they were circling them. Silas raised his rifle, panic overtaking reason. I'm warning whoever you are, show yourself. Only the trees answered. A thin trail of smoke curled upward on the far side of the hollow, barely visible, almost invisible. Yet Caleb's eyes caught it immediately. He strode toward it. The other 2 hesitated before following. The smoke rose from a patch of blackened earth hidden beneath a cluster of low branches. A small pile of burnt rope lay in the center. Caleb knelt and lifted a fragment of the rope between 2 fingers. Cut, deliberately. What's that mean? Miles asked. Caleb turned the piece over. Means someone got free, and someone helped him. Silas paced in circles, muttering, This don't make sense. They were tired, weak. They couldn't pull this off. They didn't, Caleb said quietly. Not alone. The forest rustled again. Not wind, not animal. Human, close. Miles raised his rifle. Where? Caleb exhaled slowly, eyes scanning the trees. Everywhere. Silas cursed under his breath. We'll catch 'em. We always do. But Caleb shook his head, the truth settling like a heavy stone in his gut. He said it so quietly the others barely heard. The whistling stopped abruptly. Silence fell like a hammer. Not a natural silence, an intentional one. Manufactured, chosen. Caleb mounted his horse slowly. We keep moving. Stay together. No one rides ahead. Silas scowled but obeyed. Miles swallowed deeply and did the same. They rode out of the hollow, following a narrow trail carved into the dense brush. Behind them, the faint outline of a handprint pressed into the mud near the water's edge began to fade as sunlight slowly warmed the ground. A handprint that was not there when the hunters first arrived. A handprint much larger than any human hand should have been. The hunters pushed deeper into the woods, entirely unaware of the silent figures moving between the trees, barefoot, swift and coordinated, tracking them as effortlessly as shadows follow light. And as they rode, Caleb finally understood what had felt wrong since dawn. They weren't following a trail. They were being pulled along it, led, guided, into what he could not yet say. But he knew one thing with a certainty that made his blood run cold. The forest was closing in. And they were no longer the hunters. They were the ones being hunted. Caleb Roark kept his horse at a steady trot, but every muscle in his shoulders stayed tight as they moved deeper into the forest. Morning had stretched into afternoon, but the thick canopy overhead filtered the sunlight into scattered patches that seemed to shift unnaturally with each pass of wind, or what they thought was wind. The truth was harder to name. The forest felt alive in a way that unsettled even seasoned hunters. Every rustle or whisper carried intention behind it. Miles Dutton rode just behind Caleb, glancing nervously from tree to tree. Silas Creedy stayed to Caleb's right, jaw clenched, rifle balanced across his lap, even though his hands trembled slightly with the strain of gripping it too long. None of them voiced the fear crawling beneath their skin. Fear made men sloppy, and sloppy men didn't survive hunts like this, if that was what this still was. The trail they followed began to loop in strange patterns. Footprints they had tracked for hours bent around in arcs instead of straight lines. There were signs of doubled steps, halting pauses, and sudden bursts of speed that felt choreographed, not random. Caleb kept studying the prints, knowing they revealed more than the men would admit aloud. At one point, the tracks passed beneath a fallen tree trunk, then reappeared 20 feet ahead, perfectly aligned. "That's not how tired people move," Caleb muttered to himself, though Miles overheard. "What do you mean, not how tired people move?" Miles asked, breath unsteady. "Looks like they crawled down low to slip under." Caleb shook his head. "Crawling leaves drag marks. These prints, they're clean. Someone walked here, carefully, deliberately." Silas spat into the leaves beside his horse. "You keep making it sound like they're playing with us." Caleb didn't answer, but they all knew he didn't have to. The trail widened, revealing a strip of flattened grass leading into a narrow canyon of rock formations. The canyon walls rose steep and uneven, their jagged edges creating dark shadows that swallowed the light. The air grew cooler as they approached, and the forest's constant whispers went silent, as though the trees refused to follow them into the canyon. Miles swallowed hard. "We really going in there?" Caleb studied the opening. It was too perfect, too clean, a natural funnel that would force them into single-file formation. A trap, if someone wanted it to be. Silas scoffed. "Tracks lead straight through. You want to turn back now and look like cowards?" Caleb looked at Silas, then at Miles, then at the canyon again. His instinct screamed to avoid it, but so did his pride. They were hunters, not fugitives. Turning back wasn't something he'd ever done, and he refused to start today. "We go," he said quietly. The canyon swallowed them whole. Inside, the temperature dropped further. Sound echoed strangely, bouncing through the narrow walls in ways that disoriented all three horses. The animals snorted, their ears flicking sharply at noises the men couldn't hear. As they proceeded single file, Caleb in front, then Miles, then Silas, the prints grew even stranger. They clustered tightly together, then suddenly spread apart as if the group had sprinted. But when Caleb examined the marks closely, he realized the spacing made no sense. A sprint left deeper impressions, harsher impact marks. These were light, graceful, almost effortless. "Something's off," he said under his breath. Silas, hearing him, growled impatiently. "Stop saying that, it ain't helpin'." But it was true. Everything about this canyon was wrong. Their boots scuffed the rocks loudly, but the canyon absorbed the sound in unnatural ways, quick echoes, abrupt cut-offs, as if the walls listened and decided when sound should continue. Halfway through the canyon, Caleb saw something ahead. At first he thought it was a branch lying across the ground, but as they drew closer, it became clear it wasn't a branch at all. It was an arrow, stuck perfectly upright in the dirt, painted in red clay, pointing straight at them. Miles tensed. "That ain't from no runaway." Silas glanced around wildly. "Maybe from those tribes you were yammerin' about." "No," Caleb said, staring at the arrow. "This is newer, too new. Someone planted it here less than an hour ago." "So they're ahead of us," Silas said, gripping his rifle tighter. "We're close." Caleb shook his head again. "No. If they were ahead, we'd hear them." The canyon grew narrower as they continued. Shadows formed strange shapes along the walls, faces, hands, silhouettes that dissolved the moment the men turned their heads. Caleb tried not to look at them too long. Fear played tricks on the eyes, but the longer they rode, the more convinced he became that the canyon had been chosen deliberately, a trap that didn't need weapons to work. Eventually, the canyon opened into a circular clearing enclosed by steep cliffs. The ground was covered in soft dirt and scattered stones, as though it had once been a campsite or gathering place, and in the center of the clearing lay something that made all three hunters freeze. Miles whispered the words Caleb was thinking. That's... can't be. A piece of clothing sat folded on a smooth rock, a torn vest, brown, frayed, worn to threads. Miles leaned down, studying it. That's Miles's coat. Silas stared at him. Miles is right here. No, Miles said shakily, pointing. Not mine, theirs, one of the men we're hunting. I saw him wearing that yesterday in the owner's sketch. Caleb walked slowly around the rock, studying the vest. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, but something was under it, a small leather pouch tied shut with string. Caleb opened it. Inside was a single rusted coin and a folded scrap of paper. Silas leaned forward. What's it say? Caleb unfolded it. There were only 5 words, written in shaky charcoal lines. Turn back while you can. Silas cursed and backed away. This is a joke, some fool trying to scare us. Miles looked around, eyes wide. But why'd they leave this here? They're running for their lives. Why waste time making messages? Caleb turned slowly, scanning the clearing. The ground was undisturbed except for a ring of footprints, strange looping prints that circled the rock. No other signs, no campfire, no trail out. They didn't waste time, he said softly. They wanted us to find it. Silas glared at him. Wanted? Why the hell would they want that? Before Caleb could answer, a distant sound echoed through the canyon they had just left, a soft rhythmic tapping like sticks striking stone. Once, twice, then again, slow, deliberate. Miles whispered, They're behind us. No, Caleb said, his voice hollow. They're letting us know they're behind us. The tapping stopped. The forest at the canyon's mouth seemed to hold its breath. Caleb swung onto his horse. We're moving. But which way? Miles asked. Ain't no more tracks. Caleb pointed to the far edge of the clearing where the ground sloped into a narrow trail obscured by brush. They went this way. How you know? Silas demanded. Caleb didn't answer. It wasn't that he knew. They all knew. They felt it. The trail seemed to pull at them, a quiet tug in the chest, a whisper urging them onward. They followed it. The brush thickened again, the trees leaning at odd angles as though bent by unseen hands. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching long across the forest floor. Caleb pressed forward, his horse breathing harder now. Behind him, Miles and Silas rode in anxious silence. The trail began to twist in unnatural circles. Once, twice, then again. The trees around them blurred into confusing shapes. Caleb felt something cold settle in his stomach. Hold up, he called. Miles and Silas halted. Caleb dismounted, kneeling to study the ground. He traced the prints with his fingers and felt his pulse hammer. They're walking in circles, he said. Perfect circles, not loops, not mistakes. Circles. Silas frowned. Why would anyone... Miles cut him off, voice trembling. To confuse us, to trap us, to keep us moving but going nowhere. But that wasn't what Caleb had realized. The circles weren't for confusing the hunters, they were for marking the land, claiming it. He looked up at the trees, at the strange symbols carved deeper now, spirals, cross marks, intersecting lines that seemed almost ceremonial. We're in their territory, he whispered. Silas's face drained of color. Whose? Before Caleb could answer, a twig snapped loudly just ahead. Something moved in the trees, not slowly, fast, too fast, a figure, a shadow. Caleb raised his rifle. Show yourself. Another twig snapped behind them. Miles spun around, gun shaking. There's someone here. Another sound, this time to the left, then to the right. Low footfalls, barely audible but unmistakable. Someone or many someones were pacing them again. Closer this time, much closer. Caleb mounted his horse. Ride, now. They urged the horses forward, the animals snorting in panic. The trail twisted violently, branches tearing at their sleeves. The shadows moved with them, keeping pace effortlessly. Caleb didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel the presence behind him, beside him, ahead of him. They burst suddenly into another clearing, a smaller one this time. The trees parted just enough to let a strip of dying sunlight cast across the ground. And there, lying in the dirt, was Miles Dutton's coat. Miles froze. What? Caleb dismounted in confusion. The coat was worn, torn at one sleeve. The exact coat Miles was wearing. He looked at Miles. The man's coat was still on his back. Silas whispered, barely audible, How is there two? Caleb lifted the coat from the ground. Under it, footprints, a perfect ring of them. Miles's own footprints, dozens of them. All facing inward. Caleb felt something inside him twist. "Miles, step here." Miles stepped forward, placing his boot beside the prince. A perfect match. Miles stumbled backward. "That ain't possible. I ain't been here. I'd remember this." Caleb looked around. The forest was silent again, watching. They hadn't lost the runaways, they had lost themselves. Someone or something had been studying them, tracking them, learning their movements so precisely that it could mimic Miles's footprints perfectly, lead them deeper, push them exactly where it wanted them to go. Silas whispered the truth none of them wanted to voice. "They're hunting us." Caleb slowly folded the duplicate coat and set it on the ground. He stared into the darkening forest. "No," he said quietly, "they already caught us." And as the last light of day bled away, the shadows between the trees shifted, slow, deliberate shapes that remained just out of sight, waiting. The night deepened into a suffocating darkness as the 4 remaining slave hunters continued riding west. Their nerves stretched thin after the disappearance of Harlan and the unnerving signs they'd discovered by the creek. None of them said it aloud, but every man felt it. The land no longer felt like open Texas wilderness. It felt controlled, watched, as if someone or something had closed a cage around them and was only waiting for the right moment to snap it shut. Boone rode at the front now, jaw clenched, every sense alert. The moon was high, but thin clouds slid across it in slow, ghostly sheets, dimming the path and making every mesquite tree look like a crouched figure waiting to spring. Behind him rode Nash, who kept glancing over his shoulder so often he nearly toppled from the saddle. Cutter scanned both sides of the trail with a restless, twitchy inne, gripping his rifle so tightly the knuckles of his huge hands turned pale. The 4th man, young Walker, rode silently, though his lips trembled slightly in the cold air. He hadn't said more than a handful of words since they'd left the creek. After the 3rd unexplained sound in the brush, Boone finally called out quietly, "Stop." The men pulled their horses to a halt and listened. Not a breath of wind, not a single insect. Even the distant coyotes that had been howling earlier in the night had fallen eerily silent. That was what bothered Boone the most. Texas nights were alive with noise. This night was dead. "You hear that?" Boone whispered. "Hear what?" Nash whispered back. "Exactly." Just then a faint sound broke through the stillness. 3 soft taps spaced evenly apart, not loud but deliberate, like knuckles rapping on the trunk of a hollow tree. Cutter turned in a tight circle. "Where's it coming from?" The taps echoed again. Tap. Tap. This time they vibrated through the ground beneath them. So faintly Boone felt it more in the bones of his boots than in his ears. He slowly slid from his saddle. "Light the lantern," he ordered. Walker fumbled, nearly dropping the matches in his shaking hands, but he finally managed to ignite the small metal lantern. Its glow carved out a small bubble of weak yellow light in the emptiness around them. They saw nothing but grass, trees, and long strips of shadow. Boone stepped forward, lantern in hand, moving slowly and quietly. The tapping had stopped. The silence around them thickened again, pressing in on all 4 men until Nash finally blurted out, "This ain't right, Boone. We should turn back." Boone didn't respond. He crouched by a cluster of mesquite roots and lowered the lantern. Something was there, something white. He brushed aside the dead leaves and grit, revealing a carved piece of bone, thin, smooth, almost polished, but not shaped like an animal tool or a fragment. This was carved deliberately, etched with sharp, careful lines, strange symbols, circular, layered, repeating, none of them familiar. Boone's stomach tightened. He had seen symbols like these only once before. Years earlier, he'd tracked runaways near the old Apache territories and heard whispers, nothing spoken plainly, about an exile, a man cast out, a ghost in the body of a hunter, a name spoken only in warning by those who feared the wilderness itself. And now here that mark was, buried under leaves in the middle of nowhere. Walker leaned in. "What? What does it mean?" Boone closed his hand over the bone carving and stood. "It means someone wants us to know he's watching." When he turned around, the horses were trembling. Cutter's mare snorted and stomped the ground. Walker tried to soothe her, but she jerked violently away. Then Cutter hissed, "Boone." Boone lifted the lantern higher. The world beyond their little circle of light remained empty, yet it didn't feel empty. The blackness seemed thicker now, almost pulsing. Then came the next sound, a long, dragging scrape across wood, a steady, slow motion, as though something sharp was pulled across the trunk of a nearby tree. All 4 men swung toward it. The scrape stopped. Cutter raised his rifle. "Show yourself." No one answered. Boone stepped forward, forcing his breathing steady. When he reached the nearest tree, he lifted the lantern. His heart thudded once, heavy as a hammer blow. Scratched into the bark, deep enough to splinter the wood, was a single letter, or more accurately, a symbol, the same symbol carved on the bone, but fresher, much fresher, as if carved minutes earlier. "He's stalking us," Boone muttered. "We move. Now." They mounted quickly and rode hard, hoofbeats thundering across the cracked soil, but the terrain grew rough and the moon remained veiled, making the trail difficult to see. After nearly an hour of riding in silence, Boone lifted a hand and slowed. "We need shelter, somewhere with cover. Open ground's too dangerous." "Cut," R grunted. "Ain't no cabins out here." "No," Boone said, "but there's caves near the ridge. I've used 'em before." They pushed onward until the land rose and jagged stone teeth broke through the grassland. The caves were half hidden in the hill, small but capable of shielding them. Boone dismounted first and led his horse inside, checking for snakes or animals. Finding it empty, he motioned the others in. Nash tied off the horses, while Walker collapsed against the cool stone wall, shaking. "He followed us," he whispered, "from the creek, maybe earlier." Cutter tossed dry brush into a small pile near the entrance and started a fire. The flame brought color and life back into the cave, though it also flickered erratically, as if disturbed by faint draughts despite the still air. Boone sat near the entrance, rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the night outside. "We're not dealing with outlaws," he said quietly, "nor runaway men. This is something else." Nash swallowed. "What do you mean, something else?" Boone kept his gaze forward. "You saw the body we found near the border last winter, the one torn up like it wasn't done by human hands." Nash's face paled. "That wasn't—" "It was him," Boone said. "Or someone like him." Walker's voice cracked. "But why hunt us? We didn't do nothing to him." Boone turned his head slightly, firelight catching the cold line of his jaw. "We've been hunting people for years, boy. You think that reputation don't trail behind us? Men like us leave echoes, and sometimes the wrong man hears them." The wind outside shifted. A faint whistle rolled through the stones, followed by a low thud somewhere outside the cave. Cutter reached for his rifle. "Something moved!" Boone rose and took the lantern to the cave mouth. He stepped outside, scanning the darkness. Nothing but the empty ridge. He lifted the lantern higher. That was when he saw it. 30 feet away, planted upright in the ground, was a freshly carved spear, thin, smooth wood with a flint tip, and tied to it with strips of deer hide was Harlan's hat. Neatly hung, positioned so Boone would see it the moment he looked. Boone's throat tightened. He walked toward it slowly, keeping his rifle raised. Behind him he heard Nash whisper, "God help us." Boone reached the spear, plucked the hat free and stared at the wood. Symbols carved all down its length. Precise, ritualistic. He had no idea what they meant, but he knew what they promised. This wasn't a warning. It was a declaration, a claim. The hunter wasn't stalking them. He was owning the ground under their feet. Boone snapped the spear and tossed the pieces aside. When he returned to the cave, his face was grim, set in a way the other men had never seen. "Pack your things," he said. "We ride at first light." Walker shook his head. "Boone, he knows exactly where we are. We can't wait till morning." Boone grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him forward. "Listen to me. Riding blind in the dark will get us killed twice as fast. Sunrise gives us a chance. A small one." Walker nodded shakily. Boone released him. Cutter stood, breathing hard, trying to stay brave. "What if he attacks before dawn?" Boone settled against the wall, rifle in his lap. "Then I'll be waiting." The fire crackled. The men tried sleeping in shifts, though none managed more than a few minutes of strained dozing. Boone remained awake, eyes fixed on the cave entrance, senses sharpened by years of tracking but also by a dread he refused to name. Several times he thought he saw movement beyond the firelight's reach, shadows shifting, brush bending, shapes flickering between the rocks. But each time he blinked, they vanished. Hours passed. At one point, Cutter stood and paced, unable to sit still. "We should have turned back yesterday," he muttered, "when Harlan first went missing." "Too late for regrets," Boone said quietly. "We end this tomorrow." "End it," Nash whispered. "With what? We don't even know who we're up against." Boone didn't, because the truth was he did know. He'd known ever since the bone carving, and he wasn't sure 3 men, no matter how armed, could stop the kind of hunter they were facing. Just before dawn, the wind rose suddenly, howling across the ridge in a violent burst that sent loose stones skittering down the slopes. Then they heard it. A shout, far away but unmistakable, a man's voice, calling out, screaming in terror, then silence. All four men stood frozen in place. Boone clenched his jaw so hard his teeth ached. "He's showing us what's coming," Boone said. Nash's voice cracked. "What do we do, Boone?" Boone stepped toward the cave entrance as the first pale streaks of dawn cut the horizon. He tightened the strap around his rifle, set his hat low, and drew a long breath. "We ride," he said, "but understand this." He looked back at the three exhausted, terrified men behind him. "We're not hunting him anymore." A long pause filled the cave, heavy and final. "He's hunting us." The sun rose slowly over the ridge, pale and weak, as if reluctant to illuminate the land the four men now rode across. They left the cave before the light had fully settled, moving with a tense urgency that none of them spoke of aloud. Boone led the way, posture rigid, eyes constantly scanning the terrain for movement. A flicker of shadow, a shift in the morning brush, anything that might give away the hunter's position. But the land remained eerily still, as though holding its breath. The horses moved in near silence except for the occasional stomp or snort. Even they felt the danger. Boone could sense their unease in the way they twitched, ears flicking back and forth, catching sounds the men couldn't hear. Once or twice Cutter's mare stopped abruptly, refusing to move until Cutter coaxed her gently. She sensed something. They all did. Walker rode closest to Boone, his face pale in the new morning light. His eyes darted constantly between the trees on either side of the trail. "Boone," he whispered, keeping his voice low as if he feared speaking too loud might summon something from the shadows. "Do you think he's still behind us?" Boone didn't answer right away. He slowed his horse and scanned the rising sunlit hills behind them. Nothing, and yet everything about the silence felt wrong. Texas mornings were supposed to swell with birdsong, rustling grasses, the chatter of insects, but there was nothing except the hollow sound of their own breath. "He never fell behind," Boone said finally. "He never left. He's around us, somewhere." Nash pulled his coat tighter. "Then why ain't he struck yet?" Boone's jaw tightened. "Because he's waiting for the right place." The others exchanged glances, fear mounting between them as palpable as the heat beginning to seep from the strengthening sun. They rode for another hour in tense quiet, crossing through dry patches of brittle grass and navigating uneven rocky slopes. Boone's eyes never stopped moving. It was Cutter who spotted the trail first. "Ho!" he called, raising a hand. Boone reined in sharply and rode back toward him. Cutter pointed at a faint track slicing across the dirt, fresh hoofprints heading north parallel to the ridge. Walker swallowed. "That ain't ours." "No," Boone said, "but someone rode close, very close." Cutter hopped down and bent over the prints, tracing a finger along their edges. "One horse," he muttered. "Light rider. Look how shallow the prints are. Could be a scout." Walker shuddered. "Or him." "No," Boone said slowly, crouching down beside Cutter. "He don't ride. Never heard of him doing that. But someone else was out here before us." Nash looked around, tension building in his shoulders. "You think he's hunting them too?" Boone straightened. His eyes followed the long, lonely stretch of land ahead. "Every trail out here leads to something. We follow it." They rode north, following the rider's path. The prints grew sharper, more defined. Whoever it was had picked. Up S. P'd. Twice the tracks veered as if the rider had looked back over their shoulder in panic. Boone felt his stomach tighten. Nash finally voiced the thought they all shared. "He's running." "From him," Walker whispered. Boone didn't argue. The silence was too thick, too watchful to deny it. They followed the tracks another half-mile before finding the first sign of what the rider had fled from, the horse, dead, but not torn, not gored, not clawed. It lay on its side, perfectly intact except for a wound at the base of its skull. Clean, precise, done with expert aim. The way a hunter kills an animal they don't want to suffer. Walker gagged and turned away. Nash crossed himself shakily. "Lord have mercy." Boone crouched beside the animal, feeling the wound's edges. "Quick kill," he murmured. "Clean, he never missed." Cutter kicked at the dirt. "So he was after the rider, not the horse." Boone stood. "And on foot, too. Means he kept pace. Means he's faster than any normal man." A cold silence settled among them. Cutter leaned down and examined the dirt near the horse's body. "Tracks," he said. "2 sets. The rider ran after their horse went down that way. He pointed toward the rocky stretch ahead. "And the hunter?" Boone asked. Cutter swallowed, then pointed to a faint trail curving from the opposite side. "He went around." Walker stepped forward, shaking. "Around? Why? The rider ran straight." Boone's gaze darkened. To cut him off. It was a terrifying thought. To imagine someone so skilled, so patient, that he didn't sprint for the kill, but simply circled the fleeing rider like a wolf, calculating exactly where they would end up. They followed the rider's tracks, moving quickly but cautiously. Boone stayed on foot now, walking beside his horse to read the ground more clearly. After another quarter-mile, the land sloped downward, and the faint glimmer of water became visible. They were approaching a dry creek bed, mostly dirt, with a few scattered pools left behind by recent rain. Boone slowed. "Creek's a trap," he warned. "Too open." "But the rider went down into it," Nash said. "See?" He pointed to the steep bank. Sure enough, footprints slid down the gravel slope. Heavy, messy, desperate. Boone clenched his fist. "We move careful." They descended into the shallow creek, rifles raised. Dust puffed around their boots as they stepped onto the uneven ground below. The creek curved gently, forcing them into a narrow bend. Walker stopped abruptly. "Boone, look!" There, near a patch of reeds, lay a torn strip of cloth, dark, soaked, clinging to a cracked branch. Boone picked it up. It was the corner of a shirt, or jacket. Human Cutter scanned the bank above. "If he killed 'em, where's the body?" Boone shook his head. "He didn't want them here. This is only where he caught up." "So where'd he take—" A distant sound cut Cutter off. A metallic clang. Sharp, echoing, too far to place, but too deliberate to ignore. Boone spun toward the direction it came from. "We ride." They mounted and followed the noise, slowly at first, listening for again, waiting for some sign. A minute passed, then another. Silence. Walker looked terrified. Maybe it was nothing. Clang, this time closer. Boone narrowed his eyes. Metal on metal, a trap being set, or reset. "Reset?" Nash echoed. "Reset for what?" Boone didn't answer. He drove his heels into his horse and surged forward. They approached a narrowing in the terrain where two massive boulders framed the path like a gate. Cutter's horse balked again, refusing to pass between them. Cutter cursed and tried to kick her forward, but Boone raised a hand. "Stop!" He slid from the saddle and approached the passage on foot. Something was wrong with the ground. The dirt looked disturbed, too even, too smooth in some patches, like someone had brushed over it. Boone crouched. He brushed away a layer of dust with the back of his hand. Wire, thin, nearly invisible. "Walk." R's breath hitched. "He set traps." "No," Boone said. "He set a net." He followed the wire with his eyes, tracing it up the stone, over a branch wedged between the boulders, and finally to something hidden in the brush. A weighted log angled downward, held by a tensioned rope. Nash paled. "If we'd ridden through—" "You'd have been crushed," Boone finished. He stood, stepping back from the trap, and scanned the ridge above them. The hunter knew this land intimately. He wasn't just stalking them, he was guiding them, funneling them through paths he had already prepared. Cutter cursed under his breath. "We can't keep playing his game." Boone's eyes hardened. "We don't have a choice." He dismantled the trap quickly, cutting the wire, lowering the weighted log safely to the ground. "Why would he leave it half set?" Walker asked. "It clanged just a minute ago." "Because," Boone said, "he wanted us to hear it." "Why?" "To know he's close." A cold ripple traveled through all three of the others. Boone mounted again. "We move through the ridge fast. Stay tight." They galloped through the rocky passage once Boone gave the signal. Every sound, the rattle of stones, the clatter of hooves, felt too loud, too vulnerable. The passage opened into a broader valley flanked by dense thickets of cedar. It was a place where a man could hide in 1,000 shadows. Boone slowed them to a trot. "Eyes up, watch the trees." They moved as one, rifles raised, keeping close. Minutes passed. Then Cutter hissed, "What's that?" He pointed to a cedar branch ahead. Boone approached cautiously. Strapped to the branch with leather cord was a small wooden totem carved into the shape of a twisted face, eyes hollowed, mouth stretched unnaturally wide. Beneath it hung a strip of animal hide painted with crude streaks of dark ink. Walker's face went white. "It's watching us." Boone didn't touch it. "It's a marker." "For what?" Nash whispered. Boone looked ahead into the thickening woods. "For where he wants us to go." Cutter shook his head. "Then we ain't going that way." We don't have a choice, Boone said again, though his voice was lower now, strained. He's blocked every other path. Nash looked around, panic rising. But what's he leading us to? Boone's silence was answer enough. They continued, slowly, carefully. Every tree felt like it held a pair of eyes. Every rustle set the horses trembling. The woods grew denser, darker. The sky above seemed to disappear into the canopy. A faint smell drifted through the air then. Smoke, faint but unmistakable. Cutter sniffed. Fire. Boone nodded. Close. They rode toward the scent, emerging into a clearing, just as a thin column of grey smoke drifted from a small dying fire pit, a campsite. Recently used, a single bedroll lay on the ground, torn open. A saddlebag lay spilled, its contents strewn across the dirt. Canteen, dried meat, a cracked compass. Walker stepped forward slowly, voice trembling. Is this the rider? Boone knelt near the bedroll. The ashes were still warm. The ground around the camp was scuffed, but no blood, no body. Nash exhaled hard. Maybe he got away. Boone shook his head. He was taken. Taken where? Cutter demanded. Boone stood, scanning the tree line. There, etched into a trunk on the far side of the clearing, was the symbol again, carved deep, fresh. Walker backed up, stumbling. He's watching us, right now. He's... A branch snapped in the darkness behind them. Cutter whirled. Nash raised his rifle. Walker nearly fell over himself. Boone didn't move, his eyes fixed on the trees, a shadow, tall, unmoving, watching, then gone, vanished between heartbeats. Walker screamed. Cutter cursed. Nash dropped to one knee, aiming into the dark. Boone finally spoke, voice low, almost steady despite the fear gnawing in his chest. He's not hiding anymore. He chambered around. He wants us to follow. Walker shook violently. Follow him where? Boone stared into the trees where the shadow had vanished. To the place he's kept everyone he's hunted. Silence swallowed the clearing. Nash whispered, barely audible. Boone, what if we don't come back? Boone tightened his grip on the rifle. We probably won't. Cutter swallowed hard. Then why are we going? Boone's answer was simple. Because if we don't, he'll come to us instead. He kicked his horse forward, stepping into the darkness of the trees. The others hesitated, terrified, trembling, but followed him, and as they entered the thick, shadowed woods, Walker said the words all of them had been thinking since dawn. This ain't a man we're following. Boone didn't argue. The trees swallowed them whole. The forest swallowed them almost instantly. One moment the clearing was behind them, dim but visible in the early light. The next the canopy folded over their heads like a heavy curtain, filtering the sun down to thin streaks that barely reached the forest floor. The air grew colder, despite the rising day. Thick trunks clustered close together, twisted with age, roots sprawling across the ground like the backs of buried beasts. Boone rode slowly, his horse's hooves making soft, uncertain thuds on the carpet of dead leaves. Every sound echoed oddly as though the trees were listening. Walker's horse snorted nervously, refusing to follow until Cutter nudged his own horse forward beside him. Stay close, Boone murmured. Don't lose sight of each other. Walker swallowed. Nobody's trying to lose nobody. Quiet, Boone said firmly. They moved in single file, Boone at the front, Cutter and Nash in the middle, Walker at the rear. The trees grew stranger the deeper they went, scarred with claw-like scratches, or carved with symbols Boone now recognized from the bone charm and the spear shaft. Each carving looked slightly different, as if marking stages or warnings or boundaries only the hunter himself understood. Some were fresh, sap still glistening along the edges. Others were older, blackened by time. Boone kept track of every new one they passed. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to measure how far they'd gone or how far he thought they could go before turning back was no longer an option. The woods felt like a trap, a funnel, a place shaped by hands that were no longer fully human. After a long stretch of silent riding, Nash finally whispered, Boone, how much deeper? Boone didn't answer immediately. He studied the undergrowth ahead. It thickened into a narrow hallway-like path, bordered by dense cedar on both sides. We ain't in the center yet, Boone said quietly, but we're close. Walker's breath sped up. How do you know? Boone nodded toward the ground. Tracks, human ones. The others looked, bare footprints, deep impressions, larger than Harlan's, larger than any man they knew. Walker flinched as if he'd been struck. My God. These ain't the hunters, Boone said. They're the riders. You mean he's alive? Nash asked, hope flickering for a split second. Boone swept his gaze over the prints. Alive when he passed through here, hard to say after. Walker shuddered. So the rider was brought in alive. Why? Boone didn't answer. The truth sat heavy in his gut, because a kill set in silence left no echo, but a living captive took time. He nudged his horse forward again, pushing into the darkest part of the forest. As they moved, the temperature kept dropping. Their breath began fogging in the air. Boone knew this wasn't natural. It wasn't even terrain-related. This was something else, something that seeped from the very center of the woods. Cutter cursed under his breath. "Feels like winter in here. Keep your coats tight," Boone said. "Don't let the cold get to you." But it wasn't just cold that crept along their skin. It was pressure, a heavy weight settling along their shoulders, like unseen eyes pressing down. More than once, Walker jerked upright suddenly, twisting around in the essay. Boone cut his hand shaking. "See what?" Nash asked, breath trembling. "Something behind that stump. It moved." Cutter scanned the area. "Where?" Walker pointed, hand shaking. "Right there." Boone cut him off. "Don't look for shadows. They'll drive you mad." Walker tightened his grip on the reins, sweat dripping from his brow despite the cold. "He's here, Boone. He's near. I can feel him." They all felt it, but saying so gave it power. Boone knew that much. They rode on. The forest thickened again until the trees grew so close together that the horses scraped their sides passing through. Branches lowered overhead like skeletal arms. The trail grew narrower with every yard. After another quarter-mile, the path forked, left and right. Both directions appeared identical. Cutter frowned. Which way? Boone dismounted, touching the ground. One fork had faint footprints, the rider's. The other path had no footprints at all, only disturbed leaves. "He wants us to take the left fork," Boone said. "He drove the rider that way." Nash blinked. "So we follow?" Boone hesitated. Everything inside him, his instincts, his years of tracking, told him that following the same path was exactly what the hunter wanted, but turning away from the rider meant losing the trail. Losing the last sign of another human in these woods. "We follow," Boone said. As they took the left path, the forest tightened again, swallowing them deeper into its twisting gut. A harsh quiet settled over the woods, so complete that even the sound of the horses' breathing felt too loud. Then the smell hit them, smoke, but not campfire smoke, something sharper, more bitter. Walker gagged. "What is that?" Boone stiffened. "Stay alert." They turned a bend and saw it, a ring of stones, blackened, still warm. But this fire wasn't meant for warmth or cooking. Scattered around the ring were ashes, a scatter of burned fabric scraps. Bits of charred leather. The hunter had burned something belonging to the rider, or someone else. Cutter knelt and picked up a metal button from the ashes. "This is from a jacket," he muttered. Nash looked around nervously. "Why'd he burn it?" "To leave a sign," Boone said. "A warning?" Walker whispered. "No," Boone said. "A breadcrumb." They mounted again. The forest grew darker as the sun shifted overhead. Boone checked the position of the sun through the breaks in the canopy. They'd been inside these woods for hours. Longer than he realized. Suddenly, Cutter's horse stopped short. Cutter tugged the reins. "What is it, girl?" Boone rode up beside them. Cutter pointed. There, nailed to a tree with a sharpened stake, hung a strip of dried hide. No, not hide, skin, but Boone kept his face still, his voice steady. "Don't look too close. Let's keep moving." Walker turned away, gagging again, tears in his eyes. Nash covered his mouth. "He's leaving a trail on purpose." Cutter gripped his rifle harder. "What kind of man does this?" Boone inhaled slowly. "He's not a man. Not anymore." Silence fell again. They continued deeper until the forest began sloping downward. The trees leaned at odd angles, as though the ground itself had shifted beneath them. Moss covered everything, clinging to bark, stones, and fallen logs in thick green carpets. They crossed a shallow ditch filled with stagnant brown water. Boone's horse stepped in and nearly stumbled. The water rippled strangely as if disturbed by something beneath its surface. Walker yelped and jerked his foot up. "Something touched me!" "It's just mud," Boone said, though he wasn't entirely sure. They crossed quickly. On the other side of the ditch, the trail opened into a clearing unlike anything they'd seen before. At its center stood an old structure, if it could be called that, made of stacked stones and woven branches, forming a crude enclosure. Bones, animal, Boone hoped, hung from ropes around it, clinking softly in the cold wind. They formed a loose circle around the stone hut like a protective barrier. The rider's tracks led directly toward it. Cutter exhaled. This is where he lives?" Boone shook his head. "Not lives, watches." Walker trembled. "Why bring the rider here?" Boone didn't answer. He dismounted and approached the stone structure carefully, rifle aimed. The bones rattled above him. Inside the hut lay a single object, a boot. Boone picked it up. The leather was cracked, splattered with mud, the heel worn down from long travel. It was unmistakably the rider's, but there was no blood, no torn flesh, no sign of the rider's fate. Boone stepped back. "He's showing us we're close," Nash whispered. "Close to what?" Boone met his eyes. "The end." Walker shook violently. "Boone, what if he's laying a trap? What if he wants us here?" "He does," Boone said, "but we can't turn back now." The air suddenly shifted. A gust of wind swept through the clearing, rattling the bones with a chilling crescendo. The horses reared, panicking. Cutter tried calming his mare. "Easy! Easy now!" Then came a sound that froze all four men where they stood. A scream, human, echoing through the trees not far, no more than a few hundred yards. Walker yelled, "That's him! The rider! He's alive!" Cutter spun toward the direction of the scream. "We gotta help him." Boone held out a hand. "Stop." Nash stared at him, horrified. "Boone, he's dying out there." Boone's eyes were dark. "That wasn't someone dying." "What are you saying?" Walker cried. "That was bait." Silence fell heavy, pressing the air flat. Another scream rang out, closer, sharper, desperate. Cutter's voice cracked. "Boone, we can't just ignore that." Boone hesitated. His chest tightened. He wanted to ignore it, wanted to walk away, wanted to turn back the way they came, but they couldn't, because if that scream wasn't bait, it was a man being torn apart. Boone chambered around. "We move. Stay tight. Don't break formation." They rode toward the sound. The screaming continued, echoing in waves, drawing them deeper, faster, pulling them into a part of the forest darker than anything they'd seen so far. The air grew colder still. The trees leaned inward. Shadows twisted unnaturally. Walker clutched his rifle so tightly his knuckles went white. "Boone, I don't like this." "You're not supposed to like it," Boone said. "Just survive it." They followed the screaming to a narrow gulch carved into the earth, a steep-sided ravine covered in moss and shadow. The screaming stopped, just as suddenly as it began. The forest fell silent again. Cutter's voice shook. "Boone, where is he?" Boone slid from his horse, crouching near the edge of the gulch. "Stay mounted. I'll take a look." He peered down into the ravine. He froze. At the bottom lay the rider, alive barely, his body bound tightly with strips of hide, hung from a branch like a broken puppet. His head lolled sideways, face bruised and bloodied. His chest rose and fell shallowly. "He's alive," Boone said, voice low. "But hurt," Walker sobbed with relief. "We gotta get him out." Boone nodded. "Cutter, Nash, come down with me. Walker, cover our backs." Walker nodded feverishly. Boone and the others descended the ravine carefully. They reached the rider's suspended form. Boone cut the bindings, catching the man's limp body as he fell. The rider gasped weakly, eyes fluttering open. "Help!" The man's eyes widened, focusing on something behind Boone. Boone followed his gaze. A figure stood at the rim of the ravine, tall, silent, motionless, watching. Walker screamed. Boone lifted his rifle. The hunter stepped forward, the ravine filled with the sound of his breath, deep, slow, human, and yet not. Boone felt the ground go cold beneath his feet. "He's here," Cutter whispered. Boone raised his rifle higher. "Get ready," he said, "because this is where he wanted us all along." The night had grown so still that every breath seemed to echo between the twisted mesquite trees. The fire was dying, dropping into a faint red glow that barely touched the circle of bodies lying around it. Everyone was exhausted, physically, mentally, spiritually. But no one slept deeply, not anymore. Not after the last 3 days. Not after realizing the woods were no longer something they moved through. They were something living, watching, choosing. Elijah sat with his back against a cold slab of limestone, staring into that fading glow. His fingers were wrapped around the rifle resting across his knees, though he knew the barrel shook a little from exhaustion. David slept a few feet away, curled on his side, murmuring now and then like his mind was still running from everything the night had shown him. Isaac, the youngest of the fugitives, lay with his hands tucked under his cheek, his breath slow but restless. Myrtle, the older woman, had finally allowed herself to sleep after whispering a prayer so softly that even the leaves had seemed to bend toward her to hear it, and Samuel had taken the first watch, refusing to lie down, refusing to close his eyes. He stood at the edge of the camp, a silhouette carved in darkness, steady as a stone pillar. But Elijah couldn't sleep. His pulse kept rising whenever he tried. His mind kept replaying the scream they had heard in the woods just before stopping here, a scream that did not belong to any of them, nor to any animal, a scream that had come from one of the hunters who had been trailing them. Whoever, or whatever, was hunting the hunters had struck again. Elijah didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. He leaned forward, rubbing the side of his face as a faint breeze moved through the branches overhead. It felt colder than it should have been for Texas this time of year, made the skin crawl, made the soul tighten. Samuel finally spoke. "You need rest." Elijah blinked and looked up, surprised to hear the man's voice. "I'll rest when the sun rises." Samuel didn't turn toward him. "You ain't slept more than an hour since the first man died." "You ain't exactly dreaming in peace either," Elijah said, forcing a little smile. It faded quickly. "I just can't shut my eyes. Every time I do, I see that hunter's face again." Samuel exhaled long and steady, the one hanging upside down, neck twisted. "Yeah." Elijah swallowed. "That one." Samuel stepped closer to the fire and tossed in a dry branch. It crackled and sent sparks upward, lighting his stern face for a blink. "They thought they could track us like we're animals." "Something else tracked them." Elijah's stomach knotted. "What do you think it is? A person, an animal, something else?" He didn't want to say the word, not out loud. Samuel shook his head. "Doesn't matter. It knows these woods better than we do, and it doesn't seem to like slave hunters." Elijah wasn't sure whether the hint of satisfaction he felt made him cruel or simply human. A soft rustling snapped both their heads toward the black tree line. Elijah lifted his rifle. Samuel's hand moved to the pistol on his hip. They waited, breathing as quietly as they could, until the rustling grew louder. Then a small animal burst through the brush, darting across the ground. A jackrabbit, just a jackrabbit. Elijah let out a shaky breath, but Samuel didn't lower his gun. That, more than anything, sent a chill racing down Elijah's spine. If Samuel, who had stared down slave catchers, hounds, storms, bullets, was still tense, then something was truly wrong. Moments later, David jolted awake, gasping. Isaac sat up with a frightened sound. Myrtle crossed herself before pulling her shawl tighter. The sudden fear wasn't caused by the rabbit. They all felt something else move in the darkness, something big. Elijah slowly stood. "Everyone stay quiet," he whispered. David rubbed his eyes. "What's happening?" Samuel raised a hand to silence him. The night turned heavier like the AI. Air itself thickened around them. Then came a sound that made every bone tighten. Footsteps, slow, dragging, uneven. Coming from the north, Samuel's jaw clenched. Back away from the fire. They moved carefully, silently, pressing their backs against the rocky wall behind them. The firelight no longer warmed, it exposed them. Elijah felt cold sweat slide down his neck. A shadow appeared between the trees, large, swaying. Then it stepped forward. Elijah felt his breath stop. It was one of the hunters, or what was left of him. The man staggered into the fire's weak glow, his shirt torn open, blood streaked from his chest to his legs. His right arm hung useless, the joint crushed. His face was half purple with bruising, and his mouth opened and closed as if he were trying to speak but couldn't remember how. He took one more step, then collapsed. Samuel ran forward first. Elijah followed, rifle raised in case the man wasn't alone. David froze in terror. Isaac began shaking hard. Myrtle whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Samuel knelt beside the fallen man, turning him just enough to see his neck. The skin was gashed, not sliced, torn. Elijah felt bile rise in his throat. The hunter's lips moved. Samuel leaned close. "Speak up. What happened to you?" The hunter coughed, blood flecking his chin. It wasn't an animal." Elijah's heart hammered. "Then what was it?" The man's eyes glistened with raw terror. "A man?" He swallowed hard, voice shaking. "But not a man anymore." Myrtle covered her mouth. Isaac whispered, "God." Samuel tightened his grip on the man's shoulder. "Tell us." The hunter trembled violently, tall, fast, eyes like fire in the dark. "It doesn't make sound when it moves. Not one. We thought it was a runaway at first." He choked. Elijah felt the night itself shift around them. The hunter reached up weakly, clutching Samuel's shirt. "It hunts at night. Won't stop. Won't." His voice cracked. "It took the others, all 7, dragged them off one by one." Elijah's throat felt dry as sand. "Why'd it leave you alive?" The man's eyes filled with a kind of grief Elijah had never seen in a slave hunter before. "It wanted me to run." "Why?" Elijah asked. "So it could follow," the man whispered. Then his body slackened, his hands slipping from Samuel's shirt as the last breath left him. The woods went silent again. Isaac sobbed into his hands. Myrtle whispered a prayer. David backed away until he hit the rock wall, refusing to blink. Elijah stared at the dead hunter, trying to make sense of anything. A man, but not a man, fast, silent. Hunting the hunters, Samuel slowly stood. His face had gone pale beneath the firelight. "We need to leave, now, before dawn." Elijah shook his head. "We'll be running blind." "Better blind than dead," Samuel said. "If that thing killed all the others, it's going to come looking for this one too." "Or for us," David whispered. Samuel's eyes hardened. "Maybe, but we're moving anyway." Elijah felt his legs tremble but forced himself to gather his gear. "Where will we go? The ridge is too high, the river is too wide, and those cliffs—" "We head west," Samuel said firmly, "toward the old Comanche routes. That thing might know these woods, but it won't follow us into open land." Myrtle's eyes narrowed. "If it's human or something close to human, it might." Samuel didn't respond. Then, far in the distance, deep in the trees, a sound rose, not a scream, not a howl, a low, sharp whistle. Isaac covered his ears, knees buckling. Myrtle froze. David shook uncontrollably. Elijah felt his blood go ice cold. Samuel turned toward the sound, jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched. "Move," he ordered. "Now." They grabbed their packs, their canteens, anything within reach, and slipped into the darkness as fast and quietly as they could. Elijah kept looking over his shoulder, half expecting to see glowing eyes cutting through the shadows. The trees seemed to close in behind them as they fled. After 20 minutes, Elijah realized something that made him stop. The woods were silent, too silent. Even their breathing didn't feel like it belonged here. Samuel noticed his hesitation. "Keep moving." Elijah swallowed hard. "Samuel, do you think that whistle was for us?" Samuel didn't answer, because he didn't need to. The answer was obvious. Whatever hunted the hunters was no longer hunting them, it was hunting the fugitives. Now. Elijah felt a cold truth settle in his chest. The hunters had been prey, but only the first prey. Something older, something sharper, something feral and relentless was loose in these woods, something human enough to whistle, something monstrous enough to tear a grown man apart, and now it knew exactly where they were. The group kept moving west. Branches slapped their faces. Thorns tore at their clothes. Roots tried to trip their feet. Every sound in the darkness felt like footsteps behind them. Every breeze felt like fingers brushing their backs. When they reached a small clearing, Samuel finally raised a hand. "Stop!" Everyone froze. Samuel scanned the woods, listening. Elijah did too. Nothing. Then, softly, something cracked in the trees behind them. A branch stepped on. Myrtle grabbed Isaac's arm. David mouthed a silent prayer. Samuel's whisper barely carried. "It's following." Elijah tightened his grip on the rifle. "How fast can we run?" Samuel looked him directly in the eyes. "Not faster than that." A second crack came, closer. Elijah's heart dropped. David whispered, "We're dead." "No," Samuel hissed, "we're not. Not if we split its attention." "Split?" Myrtle whispered. "Are you mad?" Samuel shook his head. "It's tracking all of us at once. If we divide, it has to choose, which might buy time for the others." Elijah stared at him. "You want us to scatter in pitch dark?" "Yes," Samuel said. "No," Elijah shot back. "We stay together. We fight together." Samuel frowned. "You saw what it did to the hunters. 7 armed men." "And it killed them because they were hunting us," Elijah said. "We ain't them." Samuel hesitated, but only for a heartbeat. "Doesn't matter, it's not thinking like a man." Isaac's voice trembled. "Then why whistle?" Silence swallowed the clearing. Elijah felt something cold and electric race through him. Isaac was right. If it wasn't thinking like a man, why mimic a man's sound? Why draw them out? Unless it wanted them to know it was coming. A shadow moved between the trees, huge, fast, silent. Elijah's breath froze in his lungs. Samuel whispered one final word, "Run," and the woods exploded with motion behind them. They ran. Branches whipped their faces, tearing at skin. Roots clawed at their ankles. The night around them seemed alive, vibrating with something that moved faster than the wind. Elijah didn't know how he managed to stay upright. Fear had taken over his legs, driving them harder than breath allowed, and he sprinted through the trees with the fugitives close behind him, their panicked footfalls echoing through the thick woods. Behind them, something crashed through the darkness, heavy, swift, impossibly agile. Elijah didn't dare look back. "Keep going," Samuel shouted, though his voice cracked under the strain of running. "Don't stop for anything." Isaac stumbled, but Myrtle yanked him upright without breaking stride. David gasped beside Elijah, losing rhythm, clutching his ribs. The sound behind them came again, a low, sharp crack that did not belong to any animal Elijah had ever heard. A breaking tree, a snapped neck, a warning signal. He pushed the thought away and forced more speed into his legs. Then a scream tore through the night. Elijah spun around instinctively. David had fallen. He tried to get up, scrambling, but something black and massive slammed into him from the side, throwing him violently against a tree trunk. "No!" Elijah shouted. Samuel skidded to a stop, turning with his gun half raised. But the thing had already dragged David across the dirt in a streak of motion too fast to fully see. Only a flash, long limbs, hulking shoulders, pale eyes catching moonlight. Myrtle screamed Isaac's name and grabbed him, both of them sprinting again. Samuel pulled Elijah by the arm. "Move," he barked. "He's gone. We can't save him." "But run!" The truth hit Elijah like a stone to the gut. David's last scream had already been swallowed by the trees. Whatever had taken him was finished before they even turned. Elijah felt sick but ran again, every breath burning like fire. They reached a narrow ravine, deep, jagged, filled with shadows. The bottom was hidden in complete darkness. "We can't cross this," Myrtle gasped. "We don't cross," Samuel said. "We go down." "That's suicide," Elijah protested. "Staying up here is too." Samuel didn't wait for agreement. He slid down the steep incline, bracing with his hands, boots slipping through loose dirt. Myrtle followed, half dragging Isaac with her. Elijah hesitated only a heartbeat before dropping in after them. They reached the ravine floor, breathless, scraped and bruised, but alive. The sound of rushing water echoed far ahead, maybe a small river cut through it. "Stay low," Samuel whispered. "The walls will hide us." Elijah swallowed hard. "Unless it's down here already." Samuel's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. They moved through the ravine as quickly as uneven ground allowed, stumbling over rocks and thorny roots. The moonlight barely touched the bottom, just slivers of silver breaking through the twisting canopy. Elijah's heart thundered so loudly he wondered if the creature could hear it. After several minutes of near-blind scrambling, the ravine widened, and in the faint light they saw something that made them all freeze. Blood, a long smear of it across the stones, still wet. Isaac whimpered. Myrtle held him close. Elijah felt something shift in the air, a coldness that didn't belong to nature. Samuel crouched, touching the blood with 2 fingers, then smelling it. "Human," he said quietly. The breeze carried a new sound then, like breathing, not theirs, heavy, slow, steady. Elijah turned to the left. Nothing. To the right, nothing. Above, a shadow moved. He barely had time to duck before something leapt from the ravine wall, landing on the ground with a thud that shook the stones. Isaac screamed. Myrtle pulled him behind her. The creature straightened. For the first time, Elijah saw it clearly, tall, too tall for any ordinary man. 6'5", maybe 6'7", hard to tell in the darkness, but its shoulders stretched broad and unnatural, its chest rising and falling like it was still catching breath, even though it had moved like a phantom. Its skin was smeared in mud and blood. Its face, partially hidden behind tangled hair, looked human but wrong, twisted with something wild that had no place in civilization. Its eyes reflected light like an animal's, pale and ghostly. But the worst part wasn't its size or its speed or the torn clothes hanging from its frame. The worst part was the chain around its wrist, rusted, broken, heavy. A slave shackle. Elijah's breath caught. "Oh, God!" Samuel's eyes widened with recognition and horror. It was one of them. Myrtle shook her head violently. "No, no." But the chain did not lie. The creature, this man unmade, stared at them with something between rage and grief. Its lips pulled back, bearing teeth stained with blood. Isaac sobbed louder. Elijah whispered, "He's a runaway, but something happened to him." Samuel kept his weapon steady. "He's not runaway anymore. He's feral." The creature lunged. Elijah fired instinctively, the shot exploding through the ravine and echoing like thunder. The bullet struck the creature's shoulder, but it barely slowed. It swung its arm, knocking Elijah back with monstrous force. Elijah hit the ground, hard, the rifle tearing from his hands. Samuel fired next. One shot, then another. One lodged in the creature's chest. The other grazed its ribs. The monster staggered but kept coming. Myrtle shoved Isaac behind a boulder. and threw herself in front of him, hands raised as if her body alone could shield him. Samuel stepped forward, gun empty now, pulling his knife, planting his feet. The creature roared, a sound filled with agony, pain, fury, and rushed Samuel. They collided with bone-cracking force. Samuel's knife plunged into the creature's side, but the monster grabbed him by the throat and lifted him off the ground. "No!" Elijah screamed, scrambling up. Samuel kicked, choked, stabbed again, this one deeper, right below the ribs. The creature's grip loosened. Elijah grabbed a fallen branch, thick and heavy, and swung it with all his strength. The wood cracked across the creature's skull. A second swing, harder this time, sent it stumbling sideways. Samuel fell to his knees, gasping and coughing violently. Before Elijah could swing again, the creature vanished into the shadows of the ravine, gone as quickly as it had appeared. The silence that followed was suffocating. Myrtle rushed to Samuel, touching his face. "Are you alive? Are you hurt?" Samuel coughed more. "I'm fine." His voice was hoarse. "Knife got him good, but not good enough." Elijah could barely catch his breath. "That thing, he was one of us once." "Not anymore," Samuel said. "Whatever he became, it's from the pain they put him through." Myrtle nodded slowly, tears in her eyes. His mind broke, his soul too. They made a monster of him. Isaac, trembling uncontrollably, whispered, "We should go back. We should turn ourselves in. Anything is better than this." "No," Elijah said firmly. "We didn't come this far to die in the dirt. We keep going." Samuel stood with difficulty. "The river's close. We follow it west. If we make it to the plains before dawn, we'll live." Elijah swallowed. "And if he follows?" Samuel met his eyes, jaw tight. "Then we pray he lets us go." They moved again, staying close, every sense heightened. The ravine's stone walls guided them toward the sound of rushing water. Elijah's ribs ached. Samuel's neck was already bruising. Myrtle held Isaac's hand so tight the boy winced, and still they kept going. The river appeared suddenly, its currents reflecting faint moonlight. The water was too deep to walk through, but the bank led westward, exactly where they needed to go. They followed it, their feet sinking into mud, their breaths growing colder in the early morning air. Behind them, somewhere far in the trees, a whistle echoed, slow, sharp, deliberate. Isaac began to cry. Elijah grabbed his hand. "Don't stop, not now." They hurried. The sky slowly shifted from black toward a faint steel blue. Dawn was coming. Hope, thin and trembling, stirred inside Elijah's chest. "We're close," Samuel said, but just as the words left his mouth, the creature stepped out onto the riverbank ahead of them, blocking their path, blood dripping from its shoulder, knife wound oozing, eyes blazing with something Elijah finally understood. Not madness, not hunger, revenge for what had been done to him, for the chains he had worn, for the life slavery had taken from him long before he became this monstrous shape. Elijah felt something break inside him. The creature charged. Samuel pushed Myrtle and Isaac behind him. Elijah lifted his empty rifle like a club. Myrtle screamed. Isaac covered his head, but the creature didn't reach them. A deafening crack split the air, then another, gunshots, real ones. Voices shouted from the ridge overlooking the river. Torchlight flared. Men appeared, armed, uniformed, rifles aimed down. Texas Rangers. Elijah felt his blood freeze. One shouted, "Move away from the monster." Another, "Don't let it cross, fire." Bullets tore into the creature's chest, shoulders, arm. It staggered, roared, TR-ID to push forward, more shots, then silence. The monster swayed once, twice, then collapsed onto the riverbank, motionless. Elijah fell to his knees. Myrtle sobbed quietly. Isaac clung to her. Samuel's face hardened, not relieved, not grateful. Mourning, the Rangers descended the slope, boots thudding across stone. One pointed at Elijah. "Samuel, Myrtle, Isaac. You four, don't move." Another pointed at the dead creature. "What in God's name is that thing?" Samuel stepped forward, raising his hands. "We're not slaves," he began. But the ranger interrupted. "Save it. Everyone here is coming with us." Elijah's stomach dropped. After everything, after the hunters, after the monster, after the night that should have killed them. They were still not free. Samuel stared at the ground, defeat washing over him like cold water. But Myrtle slowly stepped forward, her voice steady, fierce. "No," she said, "we're not going anywhere with you." The rangers stared at her. Elijah stared at her. Even Samuel froze, because Myrtle's voice wasn't shaking anymore. Her fear had burned away. Only fire remained, and the dead creature beside them, the man made into a monster, seemed to whisper a silent plea in the morning air. Don't let them win. The Rangers reached for their guns. Samuel clenched his fists. Elijah rose slowly to his feet, moving beside them. The night's terror was over, but the real fight was just beginning.